So the piece is now finished cooling down from being annealed. Come back over to my bench and I'm going to lay out the center again, and then I'm going to put marks approximately ½ inch apart to show where I'm going to want to strike that stamp into the piece so that it's starting to look a little bit like this where I want them to go, and I have a visual mark. So we mark the center first. I'm also going to give approximately 1 inch of space for this center area. And then I'm going to go every ½ inch. You know, and we don't think that the Vikings, you know, were that fastidious about marking for stamping as much as, you know, you get good at visual eyeballing. But as modern people, we like to use measuring tools, and again, you saw I did that really fast. I'm not really concerned about it that much either. So now I've pulled out the stamp that I made, and how to make that is a whole nother video, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But this is a hand stamp that I made quite a few years ago that is the closest one I have to approximate the stamp on this particular piece from Scotland. And the only real difference is this one has the zigzag lines in it that are connected with the dots in between each, as opposed to, you can see here on the extant piece, the smith who made his stamp, he didn't really care about making those points meet very much. And that'd be easy to make a stamp like that too. But so we're going to go over to the anvil, and I'm going to use my nice big 4-pound blacksmithing hammer, and I'm going to strike. And by the way, I marked on the side of the brass piece that's a little less tarnished, so that cleanup and polish will be a little bit easier. So I'm going to start by stamping. In fact, you know what? Pause it. So I'm going to go and stamp the center section first. So I just got to kind of eyeball it a little bit on the piece. So I hit it once really hard. See how that got stamped in there? You see that? Get close up. So then I come around, and that's why I'm using such a heavy hammer. I really want that thing to take an impression without having to try to do a double hit. And just kind of tap the side a little bit, bend it around, tap that side. So we have a little bit of that X in the middle. The extant piece is obviously a lot wider this way, so there's more room for that stamp to put in that center shape. But we're near to approximating it a little bit, and every one of the Hiberno Norse stamped broadband arm rings were very unique unto themselves. So I'm not trying to make a replica. This is my own rendition. So then I go ahead and I'm going to just stamp that same stamp, give or take, as I eyeball it down one side of the arm ring. You can see it start to curl as it gets stamped. That's because it's displacing material this way, and as it displaces it this way, it makes it want to get longer and curl up. So I'm going to spin back around to this side, eyeball where I want that. But by the way, this stamping process is not as easy as I'm making it look. The nature of striking hard and with power generated straight up and down with a heavy hammer to put in your mark and to make sure that you don't shoot the anvil, or excuse me, the stamp out of your hand and lose it, etc., etc. There's just a lot of things in this process that you're not going to get from watching. You're going to have to try it. So now you can see I've stamped that. So the stamping now is done. You can see how that went. Really, really nice. Looks great. So the piece has now been annealed, and what I also did in the interim was I cut it to length for my wrist. My wrist is about 7¼ inches around, so I've cut this approximately to about 6 3/4, maybe 6 7/8 of an inch long, because there's going to have to be an opening so that I can get it on. And I've hammered the areas where I stamped a little bit because they displaced out this way to flatten that area. And then once I cut to length, I've also filed and finished with a little bit of curve on those pieces, on those ends, to soften that up so that it's shaped more like that when it's done. So now I'm going to bend it. So I have a bending jig that I made, which is basically a piece of round stock welded to a piece of angle iron, and another piece of round stock in my post vise, and I'm going to start to just curve each side. I'm going to do each side first. See how it's pretty even. This one's not quite as much. I want to kind of make sure this thing evens in its curve as I go. So when I set that up, I set it up a little bit too far away from itself, so I want to diminish the gap inside of those two pieces of round stock so it can hold better. I've got this soft piece of wool just to keep from, doing any kind of significant marking on the piece while I bend it. You can see I'm just kind of pushing it in, pushing it forward as I go, and bend just a little bit at a time. So you can see I'm in here now, right? Go back, kind of just watching for symmetry and make it even. The section of your wrist on most people, like mine, is kind of flat here and then really curvy on both sides, and it kind of gets flat again. So that's kind of the shape that we're shooting for. Like on this one that my Duchess Runa made for me years ago, you can see where it's pretty flat here, and this is kind of flat in here, and then got really big curves here. The nice thing about doing this process is you really can't screw it up too bad. If it ends up not being the shape you want, you can, worst case, you can just anneal it to soften it again and reshape it. Flatten it and reshape it. You can see here I've got too much of a curve, so I'm just going to grab it and just bend it by hand. So see how I'm there? Obviously still too big, but now we're getting closer. And I'm going to a little bit more. You could do this shaping and bending over the horn of the anvil and a hammer. You could do it, kind of in the vise. You can do some of, if you're strong enough, you could even do it by hand as well. There's a lot of different ways to go about getting this shape. What I'm showing you is what I've found to be the most efficient and the easiest way to do it nice and even. So I'm looking for about an inch gap in here, give or take. And I want to say that's about where I want. 7/8 inch and a quarter. Depends on the size you're making and the size of your arm. But see, so I'm pretty much done. Look at the piece. This side is a little bit out of symmetric, so I'm gonna see what I can do to even that out a little bit to the other side. Maybe flatten that side a little bit more as well. That's not too bad. Now I'm going to open it up just a little bit. Maybe put a little bit more curve in the center section so that it's not perfectly flat. And there. You can get really crazy doing this to get it, perfect. Doesn't doesn't have to be perfect. If it fits and look good, that's what counts. That's what counts. So I'm gonna call that done. So there's that shape, and put it on so it needs to open up just a little bit as I put it on so it fits. And there you go. And there's an arm ring that I just made for myself. Pause.
Go.
So now we're just to the process of polishing and making this thing get nice and shiny as we want. The idea behind the brass, by the way, of using the brass is not only cheaper, we also can use copper. I don't recommend nickel. It's just too hard and difficult to work. But the brass, when it's really polished, looks like gold. And the Vikings did use gold to make these type of arm rings too, though most of the arm rings that they made in gold were much more stamped than this. But I'm going to take some 3M cloth, some abrasive cloth that I have, to rub the piece until it gets shiny. I also have different grits of steel wool that I'll use as well. There's also other types of more aggressive polishing techniques that can be used. The polishing wheel with rouge, buffing wheels with different grit compounds on them, those kind of things. But today we're going to use this 3M cloth, and we could also use sandpaper, fine files on the edges to get rid of any burrs, things of that nature. And some people I found like the polished finish of their Viking Age pieces to be kind of rough looking. And when I say rough, what I mean is not really a high polish. The Vikings did have techniques to make their silver and their gold very, very polished, just like a modern wedding band. The more expensive